Dwayne?
Yes, yes.
How do I pronounce that Tuscarora word? I'm from
My Tuscarora name is Runagwache.
Runagwache?
Yes.
Okay. So, guys, I guess you've read the stuff I've been working on. And I was grown and had grandchildren when I realized that I had grown up in the middle of where the Tuscarora War was fought. Well, I started doing research on it, and well, I'm on episode 4, and I've written 10. I want to record my next one. I want to get in the canoe, or not the canoe. I got a kayak, and go down the Contentnia Creek, and I actually want to go up to the tributary of the Contentnia, where I actually think the Contentnia city was. I can get there by the road. I can walk right up to it, but that's my next video. I wanted to get some water time. I've taken some pictures and a couple of videos, but I want to get some more water time before I actually record it. So tell me what you guys are thinking. I'm going to let you guys have the floor, and tell me what you got on your mind. By the way, I'm honored by you guys inviting me. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Anytime I see someone who is essentially, putting time and effort into Tuscarora history, incorporating a county's landscape, their own experience with their family in that region. I think there are several particular articles. There's an older man in Johnston County in Smithfield that wrote about him growing up along the Neuse in that area and learning about the Tuscarora as he got older. And he saw projectile points, and he saw pottery, and he saw these other things that showed him original presence of the people there, and he researched the history as he became an older educated man. To see him in his older age to write that, with a very, very sort of straight through history right back to us, and he mentions our communities, was really, really refreshing. To see that from their own community. So anytime we see folks, especially myself, see folks like what you're doing online on social media, I always try to collaborate, reach out, follow, just interested in what the locals are sharing, because often there is a family association, that's sometimes centuries back, like George Newbern. We've gone and I've particularly attended his events at the Greene County Library there in the past, and the Newbern family has a long history on Fort Nihotaruge and the fields there, so it's been farming over a long period. So you never know what local history folks have, boots on the ground like yourself. So seeing it is always important for me to connect, just to see what we're missing in local history with the land, how it's changed, of course, through development, deforestation in certain areas. Many areas in eastern North Carolina are still in good shape in many ways. There's still logging and things that are going on, and like sledge forests. So we keep our eyes and ears on the coastal areas. So I went back in March, I think, of last year and met one of the county commissioners there at the Fort Nihotaruge Memorial. So, we try to stay connected. So when I saw your Tick Bites, I was definitely interested in, your local narrative there. It's always good seeing locals share that history. A lot of times you see folks that are historians write about it in different ways, focusing on the war, but you don't always have folks focusing on the landscape and connection to it, both before and after the war. And that means a lot to me, for folks that continue to have a shared kinship to our land. So, I just, thought, what potential there could be in talking and speaking and finding an accord, and potentially, as you said, maybe having some on-air time with some question and answers on anything that's buzzing. We know that the Tuscarora War is always a very, well-centered topic in Tuscarora history, not as much as maybe say the treaties or our land claims in particular, but the Tuscarora War is always coming up in, say, Dr. David LaVere, his writings, maybe 2 or 3 books now, and previous folks have written about the fortifications. Dr. Larry Tice from ECU has written about the Tuscarora, and as well as Dr. David Phelps from ECU had written about dig sites done on many Tuscarora sites across eastern North Carolina. So we're familiar to, many different aspects of some of the academic side and some of the oral tradition on our own side, but not always as well as our neighbors and allies and extended relatives like yourself who still live in those areas, who have a closer kinship to them today than we do, with living in, of course, Robeson County and then across the state, like in Hickory, where Runakwache is. So my thoughts are, as you said, sort of open the floor back up to you, as well as Runakwache's thoughts on how to bridge those together, on what would be agreeable. If you wanted us to be in one of your future podcasts, you can let us know exactly how you're framing that particular podcast and maybe some topics of interest that we can bring to the table that you might like to have access to, like maybe family genealogy or family lines that we have that might connect back to the Tuscarora War era. We do have certain connections there that Runakwache can speak on a lot more. And so on that note, I will hand it over to him. So thank you again for offering the opportunity to have this conversation, and thank you as well for covering the topics that you're covering, because they do need to be covered more and more. And so thank you for adding us to your network.
Very
Thank you
good.
so
Thank
much.
you. Okay, and to start with, maybe we should introduce ourselves and our connection to the area that you're in. And my name is Dwayne Brayboy. My Tuscarora name is Runakwache, like I said before. I do carry the traditional Tuscarora title of Radishes. I was recently put up for that title by my longhouse, by my clan mother. And so that's my role at my longhouse. I am the Tuscarora language instructor, and we're working on a Tuscarora language revival because there are only a few left on the planet who can speak the language well enough at this level. And there's two of us in North Carolina, and there's a couple in New York. So I focus on language reclamation. Lately I've been making animated videos of our traditional stories and such in the Tuscarora language, so that the language gets preserved and passed on, and the stories get passed down to the children. And that's the importance of language, or the stories in our culture, is that we Tuscaroras, Haudenosaunee people, we don't believe in corporal punishment for the children. That's why from a young age we teach them our values and morals and worldview through storytelling. And so that's the importance of that. So I've surprisingly ended up being a storyteller. When I was younger, I never would have thought that I would have ended up in this role, but that's what I do. So Ranalhagif, Donnie, and I both descend from Tuscarora chiefs from the Indian Woods Tuscarora Reservation in Bertie County. And my seventh grandfather, 2 times over, and 8th grandfather on another family line, John Braveboy, he's from the Gadechnu village that was recorded as different names like Adechna, Contentna, and such, but it's in Tuscarora, Gadechnu, and the northern village pronunciation is Gadechna. And that's how the name ended up getting recorded that way, because there was a slight linguistic dialect variance between the northern village, which was north of the Pamlico River up to the Virginia borderlands, and those were the northern villages. But yeah, so we both descend from the chiefs from Indian Woods, and then, of course, after 1766, there was some settlers kept encroaching on the reservation lands, and so eventually, the ancestors, they were afraid that they were just going to come take the reservation land too, like they had taken the rest of our land. So what they decided to do to preserve the land in a way that would keep it in Tuscarora name legally is to lease it. And so the ancestors decided to migrate to our old hunting grounds of Robeson County, or present-day Robeson County. And so they established a new Tuscarora settlement there, and then leased the land in the reservation land in Bertie County. And so Donnie and I descend from the chiefs who signed that land lease, but then some didn't agree with it and they migrated to New York, while our ancestors migrated to Robeson County. And that's how we ended up there.
That is extremely interesting to me. Extremely. The part that I've been researching a little bit right now is the area around Grifton. And the writings say that and you guys feel free to correct my pronunciations, because I can barely say 4-letter words in English. So I'm terrible with anything with over 2 or 3 syllables. I butcher it. I'm sorry. But Contentna, the town, the Indian village, or the Native American village, it was written that it was between the Contentna Creek and the Neuse River, but nobody seems to know where it was. Well, that's where I grew up. And I grew up playing in the woods, playing in the creek. And I had when I turned 7, I got a small Honda dirt bike. And I rode that dirt bike all over what's current day Tick Bight, all over the woods, all over everywhere. There's a path that's old, and it runs along the Contentna Creek. It goes all the way to Grifton. There was an old bridge there that was there around the Civil War, and the concrete foundations of the bridge are still there, and the road runs right to that bridge. It leaves that bridge, it goes along to Contentna Creek, and it goes all the way to Tick Bight. It crosses where the current paved road is, and goes all the way to Braxton's Landing, which is where riverboats used to come in and land. All in those woods, I found arrowheads, pottery, all kinds of stuff all throughout there. But there's one particular field that the farmer would let me play in and ride my dirt bike in when there were no crops in it. I just couldn't tear it up. I had to respect the land. But this one particular field, and it's still there, by the way, it hasn't been developed, it hasn't had a house built on it, and it hasn't been dug up, so it's still there. But this field, I could take a basket and just start walking through the field, and I wouldn't get a quarter of a way across the field. My basket would be full of arrowheads and pottery shards and stuff. I even found an iron axe head. I have it. I've got to find it. I got to put hands on it, but I have it. And I found a buggy axle from an old horse-drawn buggy. I found that in the woods. I didn't find it in the field. But I believe that this field was the location of this village. And there's a couple of reasons why. We all know where Fort Nehoroka was. How'd I do on that, Dwayne? Did I pronounce that okay?
Very good. Neharuge is how we say it, but that's extremely good for
Say it again for me.
Neharuge.
Neharuga. I'm
Very good.
actually fluent in a couple of languages. I'm just not fluent in this one, but I'd love to learn. I speak English,
Yeah.
Spanish.
Really
I speak
good.
Spanish fluently. I know a little German, a little French, but I think I could probably learn it. I need you. But anyway, we know where the fort in Greene County was. And
That's amazing.
and we know what the landscape looks like. It's not right on the Contentnia Creek. It's off the Contentnia Creek, but there's a tributary of the Contentnia Creek that runs up to where the fort was. It's called Fort Run, and it comes right up to where the fort was. Well, if you pick that up and sit it down in tick bite at the field where I'm talking about, it's a mirror image. There's a tributary from the Contentnia Creek that comes up right behind where the fort would have been. The path, the road, if you will, the old road, is across the paved road a few hundred yards, just at the wood line. Across, there's a field. It's all fields, but at the back of that field is where the old road is. So, and there is an old road that leaves this area and goes back to the creek. It's still being used. It's an old road that people have used for their driveways, but it's old. It's been there a long time. But I believe that is where the city was, or where the fort was. I think that's where it's at. It is a logical place. And the relics are just it's just unbelievable how many relics are there. And they're still there. They're
That's
still
amazing.
there. Also, I told you that I played all over these woods as a child. There's pecan trees in the woods. There's pine trees, and then there's pecan trees. So our parents used to take us to go pick up pecans. Well, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I didn't care nothing about really picking up a pecan, but I didn't mind climbing a tree. So some of these pecan trees were, I'm going to see, like this. They started up a little way, and then they were bent over, and then the top part came back up. And they were really old trees. This was in the 1970s, and I was a young child, 5 or 6 years old. So it was in the 1970s. But these trees were really old. You know how trees get when they get old. So I know it was a really old tree, and it was bent like that. And I thought it was weird that the tree was shaped like that, but it was kind of cool because I could climb it easier, because I could get on the tree where it was bent and walk up it, and I could get a right good ways up the tree, you know. Well, as I got older and I realized that wasn't just a tree, it was a road sign. And it still existed in the 70s when I was a child. It was still there.
Amazing. Yeah, we have one of our 3 bands is called Saddle Tree for that reason. That's the way that we mark our trees, paths in the old days.
And we know that there's been some found in Clayton in Johnston County as well, which of course is just next door to, some of these other counties that are just offshoots of those tributaries as the river continued up, and sort of northwesterly, I guess you could say. So we've seen different models, from different historians about where some of those particular towns were. They sometimes include Gadethnu, they sometimes don't. A lot of them were more focused on those towns surrounding Gadethnu and Niyaharuge. And so a lot of the focus was on those towns that eventually left and dispersed out of the region. And we do know that based on traditional housing patterns that they would have shifted where longhouses were. They wouldn't be permanent necessarily for, say, like 50, 60 years. They might change every 10, 15, maybe 20 years to allow sustainability and balance in the ecosystems. So when they created the longhouse, they might go, on the other side of the river or on the other side of the woods across the river. So sometimes it would shift and not be exactly in that same location a couple seasons down the road, a couple winters down the road. So sometimes that's hard to pin down. And I know that sometimes has been an issue with them trying to locate those different towns, especially near Grifton, because the museum there, and I know the fellow that runs that museum has reached out to us several times over the years with them, making model longhouses and things like that near the area, which, is fantastic. But I do know that a couple of those folks have like some knowledge of where they think it may be as well as there was a Thomas Beeman, I think if I get his name correct, who had done some work on what was supposed to be, some folks would say Toisnot, we would say Dosniak, village near Wilson in the river there, Trajunta. So there's many different folks that have looked and maybe thought they found a village, but there's been so much development, it's hard to find, what would be a complete longhouse when it's wooden and been deteriorated over years or been bombarded like Fort Niharuge was. But we do know that Fort Niharuge was, dug up many times, plowed over by the soybean fields and the Mewburn family. So we would imagine that certain areas around that is very similar. So, folks like you have knowledge of where they could be, finding artifacts, that's amazing. That's amazing because we do know that area has been farmed consistently over, the centuries. And so that just continues to plow over burial mounds and artifacts and, projectile points, axes, if you would, different trade goods. So yeah, I mean, it would be really good to maybe see that one day, to have some, knowledge of how well it was established, if that is something more than just artifacts. Usually something as what you're saying is, that much of a surface collection would establish meaningful connection of wanting to know more. So a state archaeologist's next step would be, of course, a surface dig of some sort to evaluate further conjecture about how far to dig or necessity of environmental impact. But, it's very essential to have that protected. If we have this something like that in that area, there were clusters of villages around that area of the Contentney, Niharuge, Kenta forest. There were, a lot of different forts that they were establishing for those defensive measures. And of course, they were not necessarily always right on the village site. They may have, as you said, be right off the village site or nearer to the creek, to have that access if they're going to be boarded up for weeks or months upon a time, and then don't know when they're going to have access again to fresh water. So it's, exactly as you stated, Fort Niharuge had backdoor access to the creek, and had different portages to it to establish the freedom to be independent enough to both be defensive but still have residential quarters all in through, the bunkers of the fort. So and seeing how well they just amassed, turtle meat and beans and corn and peaches and apples, and we're just gearing up for the long haul, reading these documents about the archaeology of the fort, and how many bodies were found later, or not found. And those that were dug up and not dug up and moved. And then, as we, Runapacha and I now know, even tens of thousands of wampum beads that were there that were excavated. So there's a lot of different things, just within one site that contextually and archaeologically has been extracted over many decades, starting in, say, 92, and then much later in early 90s, early 2000s, that's now in many different places. That was in one place where we could have visited and honored and ceremonied and, many different things to improve connection to the history, to our connection to the land, to other folks' connection to the land, like yourselves. There's not much for Fort Niharuge besides the memorial, and so that doesn't really give us the ability, rather, to meet our ancestors where they made their last rest and give thanks and give honor to their sacrifices. So, sure, we can do that at the memorial site, but is that the exact site where, the fort burned? Not necessarily. And we know that it's not from conversations with local folks. I mean, I was there with Derek Burress, who's one of the county commissioners, and he was, sort of very clear with me while I was there. I was like, look, we know that there are things just down the road here, that we can't necessarily like take you to, but we know is there. But, maybe one day we can, have the opportunity to show that or to go to that or something of that nature. And they may know, I believe, where the mass grave is, as well as where some artifacts may be around that area, not too far from the memorial site, where the signage is and the actual memorial. So, we get these little conversations where folks are they have these hints or they have these experiences where they grew up in the creeks, as you have, or they've lived nearby in Greene County all their lives, or they know farmers, they know other, businessmen in the area or homeowners, that don't really maybe do a lot of excavations or development, but have, as you stated, just left areas protected. It's just like, we know it's there. We don't mess with those things. We honor them. We say our thanks, and we continue to live on the land and, come in peace and honor. I think that's very important, because some folks would just see it as, well, let's just, tear this up. Let's call an archaeologist and let them come in and dig everything up. And that doesn't give us the ability to be consulted. It doesn't give us the ability to say, hey, this is how we feel about, developments and excavations and things like that, even though there's state and federal law that's supposed to protect our rights to that. Again, hands down, respect for your experiences and your knowledge on those items that you talked about. If there's a time in the future to potentially come out, like meet you in that area, like, have lunch somewhere and, get to know each other a bit more face to face, I would love to do that in the coming weeks if you would be available.
So the field that I'm talking about and the farm that I'm talking about, the land's been sold, and it was sold to a mining company, and they're digging up sand just as hard as they can. They're hauling tick bite away by the truckload. The good news is the field that I'm talking about that was so full of the relics hasn't been touched. And I'm going to say it hasn't been touched yet, but it hasn't been touched. The fields across the paved road are being actively farmed, and a hunting club has posted signs on it. So it's natural land, if you will. It's farmland and natural land. And that's the land that goes all the way to the creek. But the spot where the relics are at, there's literally a dirt path between it and an open mining pit where they have dug just tremendous amounts of sand out of there. I've been out of the area for a while, and I came back to the area, and I drove in, and I was like, oh my God, what happened?
Do you know the name of that mining company, perchance?
I don't, but I'm going to try and find out.
Yeah, if you can find out, I'd like to do, some my own research. If I have a starting point, I'm usually pretty good at being able to locate something of substance, whether that may be something during their tenure on the land or not. For instance, if there's been some environmental study, cultural study, cultural resource by military, anything like that in that county near it, I can pull that. And of course, it'll.
I'm going to pull up a map. I'm going to pull up a map, and I'm going to show you where it is.
And before we move on too far, and I forget, if you would be willing to map out or show on a map where you said you believe the village was?
Getting ready to show you right now.
Oh, okay. I'm asking for a specific reason because I've had an ongoing project for a very long time where I am mapping out Tuscarora, our old villages, our village sites on a map. And I'm going to create a map exclusively Tuscarora language, but with like English translations of the village names and such. And so having this would be really valuable.
So this is the area that's called Tick Bite. This is the Contentnia Creek. This is the Noosh River. And they come together back over here. This is called Maple Cypress Swamp. And it's beautiful. And it's very natural. You can get in there on a kayak or canoe, maybe a small john boat. But it's absolutely beautiful back in there. And that's where one of my trips is planned to go by canoe. This old road, parts of it is still being used. You can see it. This This is where the old bridge is, right here. There's actually stoneworks right here, and the bridge used to cross right here to go into Grifton. But you see this dirt path right here?
Yes.
It goes, follow me through the woods here. You can sort of see it through the woods. It follows the creek through the woods. It comes around. It comes back out over here.
Uh-huh.
This road right here has been here a long time as well, but this is the old road, and it follows the creek. These are power lines. It follows the creek. We're getting into some parts where it's not being maintained anymore, where nobody's using it, but it follows the creek. You can still see it.
Right.
And we are into tick bite. Now, when I was a child, this lake, this pond was not here. There was a small canal that ran through here. And this road came right up along this canal line right here and came out to where the paved road is here, went straight across, and this was all trees. That path was there. It's been well used here lately. Let's come down this way. See this path here?
Yes.
That's been there. It came up. We've sold the property to the county because it all flooded and got ruined. But we owned this. We owned this. And we owned this. And I played all over this place.
Oh.
So you see this is a power line. But you see the old path?
Yes.
It came along in here, and this is Braxton's Landing back in here. This is where the river boats used to come in. So that old path came up. Let me find there's a sharp curve. There it is right there. This is the paved road. And then this is the dirt road that came around. It's been there. It's been improved a little bit, but it's the same road. And it came all the way back in here and went all the way to the river and then around to Braxton's Landing. So these all roads have been here forever.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to show you where I think the village was. Let's start with this. This is the old road that still goes to the creek. This is Tick Bite Road. And this is the old path. This is the old path. And it goes back to Contentia Creek and Eagle Swamp. So if we look across the road from that, follow Eagle Swamp up, this is the paved Tick Bite Road. Here's the mining operation that's going on. But this is the field right here that was full of artifacts.
Oh.
This is it. And when I say it was full, I mean it was full. There used to be an old farming building, we called them pack houses, that stood right here. And there was a mound of dirt next to it. Just a big mound of dirt. And I don't really know what was in it. The pecan
It's probably a burial mound.
Well, I wasn't allowed to dig in it. The pecan trees were back here.
Yeah, see, everything I've been listening to everything you've said about the description of the area that you believe to be the village site, and everything adds up. It would have been perfectly the Tuscarora thing to do to have a path between the Neuse and Contentna or Gadechno Creek, connecting the two, and then the area with access to water with the pecan trees, where then you found the artifacts in that field. Because see, something I often explain whenever I'm speaking for the people about our history and such is that a lot of people think that we just, when it was time to go to a new village or establish a new village, we just picked up where we were at and wandered off somewhere until we just found somewhere to go to and just settled down there. But actually, Tuscarora's, it took us a generation to establish a new village. We would have runners go out and search for land that had access to water, and then there are other criteria for the settlement. And if it was decided that's where we would go, then the runners would start clearing the land and establishing fruit and nut trees, which, you know, takes a long time for them to start bearing fruit. So that's why we would establish these things a generation in advance before moving there. So everything you showed me fits perfectly with the way that we would establish a village.
So this area right here is called Sawmill Road, and it meets Tick Bite Road at a T intersection. I zoomed in on it. This is a dirt road. All right, so this dirt road right here in this little small curve, there's an old farmhouse right here, and it's circa 1900 maybe. I remember going in it as a child. It was old architecture, but it was built around 1900. I don't know if you can see it in that picture, but
Yes.
3454 Sawmill Road. This was the Barwick family, and they owned this farm over here. The other farm we were looking at was the Braxton family. The Barwick family owned this house, and then they owned this smaller house next to it. I had some friends that lived in this house, and my parents were friends with all of these people. So this little dirt road right here that goes back towards the field, back then this was a field. I don't know what this is. Somebody's house, or I don't know what it is, but that was a field back then. And this pond wasn't there. This was a huge field. But this tree line that ran down beside the field, and it went all the way through here, was where we would pick up pecans.
Huh.
And that, in relation to where I think the city was, the village. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit more. There's the tree line for the pecans. And we run right into, this is where the city was. This is where Contentnia was.
Right.
You know, that's far enough away from both the Contentnia and the Neuse not to flood the village there. So that's really good for business. It's right there from wooded areas that would have had tree lines with the pecans and other trees, which would have given both retention from water flooding and natural shade and protection from strangers coming up unbeknownst. So it hits a lot of highlights. You know, if I was choosing an area, regardless of this, you know, more cut out fashion with some of the fields next door, it does seem like that would be a very, very strategic location along both those areas of the Contentnia and Neuse.
Yeah. And just a trivial fact is that our word for a Tuscarora word for just a nut is a wentret, but we get the word pecan from the Algonquian speakers, and the Algonquian people's language, pecan just means nut in their language. But I
Okay.
guess that there's just such a prevalence of the pecan trees where the word originated from that it became just synonymous with a nut. I saw the rattlesnake swamp
Yeah.
out there, and it made me think that something about Tuscarora culture is that especially the rattlesnakes. I have an old account of a Tuscarora man saying to a settler that we wouldn't kill the rattlesnakes because they were like our relatives. And there's an old Tuscarora belief that if we kill the snakes, that their relatives will come get us. And so we just don't kill snakes, except for there's this tradition we have where we will, some of the old folks would kill a black snake and hang it in a tree for rain. But yeah.
Still busy.
So you mentioned the Grifton Museum. Here's the Grifton Museum.
Yeah, they've reached out to us at the Grifton Museum, and we didn't get enough notice to really be able to gather enough people to go put on, like a dance presentation and that sort of a thing. But hopefully we can work with them again in the future.
So this area here is the Native American village that the Grifton Museum is built. Their longhouse, I think it burned down. They had some interlopers that were using it for the incorrect reasons, and I think it caught on fire. But directly behind where their display is, there's two foundations. There's one here and there's one there. Do you see those?
Yes.
That was an old ferry
Oh,
that went across the Contentnea Creek. It was originally operated by hand, and then they used a steam engine called a steam donkey. And the steam donkey was mounted to this iron or this concrete pad here, and it had a chain or a rope that went across the creek that pulled the barge back and forth. So Gary from the Grifton Museum and I were talking, and he said there had to be something on the other side. So I went over on the other side and walked down the old road. And when I got right about where the ferry should be, there's a big hump on the bank that's covered in trees and vegetation, but it's noticeably 5 or 6 feet taller than everything else around it. And I think that's where the pulley system is going to be for the other side of the road. The interesting thing about it is I did get a metal detector hit when I hit it with a metal detector, but I didn't dig.
okay.
I didn't have permission to dig, so I didn't dig.
Right.
But I think that's going to be right there, and the old bridge is right next to it. So
Yeah, makes sense.
So this was where the road was. And of course, the town of Grifton has been developed and the old road's gone. But when you scroll out, you start seeing across the countryside scars on the land that come down to the creek and various places where the road could have been. Now the old road again, when you leave Tick Bite, you get up here where the old road comes in and hits the paved road.
Yes.
It goes out. It goes out like it's going to cross Highway 11. And then there's a dirt road offshoot that's been there. It's old, that goes out this way, crosses 11, and then there's this road on the other side's paved. But that road goes off to, if you follow it out, it takes you all the way to Hookerton and eventually Snow Hill. That was the original old road, and most of it's paved now, but some of it's not. But the towns in the area during, back then, as they were settling it, were Grifton, Hookerton, and Snow Hill. Hookerton didn't develop because the railroad came through Grifton and it didn't go through Hookerton. So
Right.
the railroad's what brought, and this is way beyond 1700s, but we're at least 100 years in the future.
Right.
What confuses me is we have all this history here in this little area, and I grew up, with Gettysburg and all these historical places that things happened, and I didn't know my own history, that where I was at, that the Tuscarora War took place right where I was standing. The history books in school gave it about 2 paragraphs, and we moved right on along.
And you got more of an education than I did, because we never got any Native American history in Cumberland County at all. I remember, in fact, when I was in 8th grade in like 1984, and in Fayetteville, and my social studies teacher said that to us that American history began when Columbus arrived, and I just remember sitting there at my desk and saying, to myself, well, what about my people? Where do we factor into that? And I do believe that there's just, I think America wants to bury it. That's the way it feels.
I know that the Tuscarora were farmers. The European settlers that showed up in what happened to your headdress, brother?
I had to run and deal with some children while my mama was trying to leave, so had to take it off while I was picking that one young'un up and putting her back down.
So the European settlers, when they showed up, they didn't show up to a wilderness, to an untamed wilderness. They showed up to a settled country. The farmers, there were fields, there were crops being grown. It wasn't a wide open, empty country. And that's sort of what I was told, growing up, but that I found out that wasn't true.
Yeah, and we taught them how to farm this land and how to farm corn because, of course, corn is indigenous to Turtle Island. And they didn't have corn in England or in Europe. And so, in addition to not knowing how to farm corn, they didn't know how to farm on this land. And so we taught them how to farm on this land, and we taught them how to farm corn.
And I got the education in school about Plymouth Rock and so on and so forth, but the first colony was here in North Carolina, and the story here is way more interesting. If
I think so.
Tell it.
Yeah.
I don't know why we don't have visitor centers and stuff that celebrate the history, because history's not there for your approval or disapproval. History happened. And
yeah.
Yeah, I tell people often, if I tell people historical truths and people get uncomfortable about it, and some people get cognitive dissonance going on, and I tell them that they're not angry at me, they're angry at history.
That's right.
There's no moral gradient assigned to history. It happened.
Yeah, it's sort of that mirror ball. You people feel personally guilty for history, because they're not their ancestors. We're not our ancestors. In some ways, we are. In some ways, we aren't, by what's taught and what's experienced. But generally speaking, like corn, for instance, as you were talking about, the many hundreds of bushels of corn that Barnwell and his forces, snatched out of those Tuscarora homes before they burnt them to the ground. So not only Tuscaroras in a way, provide the land for other natives that they were attempting to incentivize for their service. The Chirral and the Catawba and the Cherokee became the Yamasee and the Wateree and the Waccamaw that came. One of the major incentives was Tuscarora land, because the colonies didn't really have anything to pay those men. So they offered them guns and ammunition and clothing and rum, and Tuscarora captives and land. And so that incentivized Tuscarora erasure to a great degree. So there's a lot of things that, surrounding Native American tribes don't really want to talk about in concerns to that history, because they too, in that time had a part in our erasure from the land, by consequence, especially the lands between the Cape Fear and Neuse River. Particularly those lands were of a sort of retaliation or a threat, of getting back at the Tuscarora. So when the colonists came in with guns and ammunition, supplied them with a lot of these Suans and some Iroquois and some, I'm sure, Algonquins as well, to attack the Tuscarora, you had many bushels of corn, of Tuscarora corn, that was going to feed them, on their sieging of these forts and attacks of these towns. And I think, like reading John Barnwell's account of his diaries, of how many people that they took in captivity, how many people they killed, how many people they sold, how many villages they burned down, how many homes in particular they burned down. They kept a really good account, which is, both what historians and, largely what very prestigious and wealthy whites were doing at that time, like himself, John Lawson and Barnwell and DeGraff and Reed. They had the education, the background, and the connections to be able to do these things. What is it, Mama? Hold on. Calm down, hold on. We'll find it in just a minute. Hold on, Mama. Okay, calm down. But the corn, just like the land, the corn was used. And it worked against Tuscarora. Our own corn, went to folks that, attacked our villages, removed our folks, and then helped colonists take our land. So, there's a lot of the history that's hard to perceive, like, women and children being targeted, elders being targeted that were in that defensive fort. To much of the degree, they weren't offensive fortifications, they were defensive fortifications. So instead of the Tuscarora being seen as protecting their own land, protecting their own communities and their own, sovereignty.
So this is, can you guys hear the birds?
Yeah.
Can you see all the ducks? I can't make it bigger. This is some of the stuff that I'm working on that I haven't published yet. This is the Neuse River. They're all going to scoop here in a minute and fly up. I got real close to him. I didn't speak to somebody else.
Those snipes?
They were snipes and ducks and a couple of seagulls.
Oh,
Very, very, very cool.
We have a snipe clan.
Really?
We do. That's one of our Tuscarora clans, is a snipe clan. And something that some people don't know is like our snipe people, they take on, have these personality tendencies that are like the snipe. And they tend to be very fat people, fast movers. They will like come at you and say what's on their mind real quick, and then they're gone, and then they go do something else, and that's just typically like snipe stuff. But something that I also tell people about the snipes is that because they're so fast, if the measure of a marksman is that for as fast as the snipes fly, if a marksman is able to hit a snipe, then he earns the title of being a sniper.
I just learned something.
That's where that comes from. Yeah, sniper, the term sniper is it's related to how fast the snipe birds are.
So in my readings and studyings, because I got interested in this, as an adult, when I learned that other Native American tribes fought with Barnwell and against the Tuscarora, I sort of scratched my head and I said, why would they do that? We know what history rewarded them with, because it would be 100 years, but 100 years later, they would be the ones facing the Europeans, and there was nobody to help them at that point.
And not even that long, because it was right after the Tuscarora War that they ended up recruiting Tuscaroras to go down to South Carolina and fight the Yamasee. And so, and that was the divide and conquer dynamic. They would try and the Occaneechi almost got completely exterminated, because what the settlers did was they went and they killed I believe it was the Nottoway, and they killed a Nottoway person and took his clothing and gave it to an Occaneechi person. And the Occaneechi Indian was thinking, oh, this is a great gift, that these settlers gave us this gift of these fine clothes. And so then the settlers went and told the Nottoway, who were fierce. We call the Nottoway Jihru Ehaga, meaning like the way that means like the way that a swarm of bees might go attack somebody. That's what that means. And so the Nottoway were really fierce. And so they went and told the Nottoway, oh, we saw the person who killed your Nottoway tribesman. It's an Occaneechi man. We saw him and he's wearing his clothes. And so they were like angry. And then they said, we're going to go get the Nottoway. And then the settlers said, oh, here's some guns. Here's some guns. We'll help you.
Yeah, that's divide and conquer. That's get the two big dogs on the yard to fight each other, and then all you got to do is sit back and watch.
Yeah,
that's pretty smart. So
yeah,
I grew up with a family friend of ours was the Brown family. That was their last name was Brown. And they were Native American. And Ann Brown was my high school English teacher. I had her for 4 years. She taught AG English, but she knew me since I was born, and my dad and her dad were friends, and my mom and her mom were friends. She had known me since I was a child, but she was older. She was older than me and old enough to be my high school teacher. So, she taught us English, but she also taught us other things.
Mm.
And there was a thing she had to teach us, which was English. When I left that lady's class, I joined the military, and the military offered us CLEP tests, where you could take these CLEP tests in lieu of college classes.
Right.
That lady taught me so much in English class that I CLEP'd 22 semester hours of college study. just based on what she taught me in English class.
Mm.
Social science and history. I took the first CLEP test and I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to pass it. And I maxed it out. So I was like, just keep giving them to me and I'll figure out what I don't know. Well, I passed them. And it was just her trying to teach us things that, I don't know, weren't part of the curriculum.
Right.
But I've always respected her for that. She died not long ago. And then in 2011, I think it was 2011, I was driving through Greene County and there was just masses of people everywhere on the Naharoka farm. And they were in Native American, some of them were in Native American dress, some of them were not. So I saw this massive gathering. So I pulled my truck over and got out, walked over and started talking to them. And I wish that I'd had a camera, a video camera, where I could record the stories that I was told. And I got a major education, and that's where my inquisitiveness about the area sort of kicked off, was talking with these people. They told me the stories. They told me about what had happened on this dirt. And I've always got a bit of nostalgia. I told you I want to take the kayak and go down to Contentnia Creek. I've done it before. I was much younger, but I've taken a John boat from the Grifton boat ramp almost to New Bern. So past Fort Barnville. So that's the path that would have been taken into the Tuscarora heartland from New Bern. You know, at the time, New Bern was, 5 or 6 buildings and a big puddle of mud. It was not what it is today. But it was that and Bath. Bath was really the only town. And then New Bern was a backwater outpost. But I traveled up and down the Contentnia Creek as a child, and you get in there and you kind of forget what the real world looks like around you, because it's like you've gone back in time, especially when you get in Maple Cypress Swamp, because it's a whole different world. You hear the birds, you see the fish, you see the alligator, you see the snakes. I would love to talk with you guys about anything you want to do. You've shared a lot of information with me. You've shared a lot with me, Runa Kwachi, and I do appreciate it. And
Well, you're welcome.
And I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that just the experience of a child, because I've got the experiences of a child that I'm sharing with you where I grew up. I hope that it's been beneficial to you in some way.
It definitely has been. This has been educational, and I'm grateful for you sharing your knowledge with us about this place that we're tied to, that land, and yet we have been separated from it. And so we're grateful for you sharing this knowledge about that land with us that we don't know anymore. So thank you.
Yes, sir. And don't be a stranger. You guys can call on me anytime. I'll be glad to talk with you.
We'll definitely be in touch.
I'm going to share one more thing with you. This is out towards Craven County. This area out here where there's nothing.
Yes.
You see this?
Yes.
This is the area where we were hunting when I was a boy, when I was a child. And we ran into the rattlesnake, like I say, that bit and killed the grown man.
Oh.
And he died almost instantly. But that snake was so big that my dad mistook it for a tree.
The rattlesnake.
Yeah, he thought it was a tree laying across the path.
Great day. Whew.
And he wound up shooting it and killing it with a 30-06.
Okay.
But it was huge.
Yeah.
They laid it in the back of a full-size Chevrolet pickup with an 8-foot bed, and it drooped off the back.
Good grief.
It was huge. So
Eastern
this area,
Carolina is a unique place in the world like that. It
so
really
this area
is.
still, there's Blunt's Creek. This area
Yeah.
is still undeveloped.
Our wartime chief during the Tuscarora War was Chief Tom Blunt.
Tom Blunt, yes.
Yeah, so I wonder if that creek was perhaps named after him. I don't know.
Blunt's Creek. It's the right area.
Right. Right.
So how did Tom Blunt and Hancock, how did those two chiefs wind up with European names? I've been told that the Europeans just gave them a name because they didn't like their Indian name, so they gave them.
It's really that simple. Now, Chief Tom Blunt, you know, his name, his Tuscarora name was Sikaga, but the Europeans, they had a very difficult time with Native American, particularly Iroquoian language or languages. There seems to be a sound set in like Algonquian and Fon languages, and that are familiar to them because the sound sets appear in English. Like, say, Tatanka means buffalo in Lakota. Now Tatanka is not an English word, but that sound set, Tatanka, that appears in English language, those syllables. But like in Tuscarora, words like, say, Waihe, that sound set does not appear in English anywhere. So they had a very difficult time with Tuscarora language. And so when they interacted with the chiefs, they're like, can we just call you something else because we, don't know we're never going to remember your name. And so they would assign them these names, and it eventually became a whole culture of, okay, well, the next generation of Tuscarora leaders are going to have to interact with these people, these settlers, and so they're going to have to adopt a European name as well. And so then that's how it began getting passed down. And then there was a period of time in Colonial North Carolina where they mandated, that people had to have Christian names, that they had to have a first name and a last name, and they had to be familiar to Europeans. The only real Tuscarora name that my people carry still in origin is my surname of Brave Boy, which comes from Brave Boy, of course. And my seventh grandfather, he was called John Brave Boy. The English called him Captain Jack, but his Tuscarora name was Ragwadichaye. And he earned this name for performing a meritorious act in battle during the Tuscarora War, because when the Tuscarora War began, he was about 13 years old. And so he was fighting in the war then. And so we don't know what act he actually did, but he performed some meritorious act in battle that earned him the name Ragwadichaye, meaning brave boy. And then when the period of time came that the fledgling government of North Carolina said you have to have Christian names, that name just got translated from Ragwadichaye to Brave Boy. And then because we don't have a V sound in the Tuscarora language, we tended to elide that sound. So Brave Boy became Bray Boy. And here I am.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking your time to talk with me and share your story with me.
Thank you for listening to us, and thank you for inviting us. It really is an honor to be included, you know? Yeah, and I'll say, Ginurita, disne watkan herates, disne wapas du thate, disne nagaitsa satne disne had thate, disne had nit nitnerat nawe. And so that is, I appreciate you and your time, and I hope that you have a good evening and that you enjoy the coming weekend.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I find myself standing on the creek bank of the Contentnia.
Yeah.
And looking down at the water and the cypress trees. And I listen to the birds and the crickets and the frogs. And I picture what it would have been like 300 or 400 years ago to be living here. I also think about how we as a society would feel today if somebody showed up and told us, we realize that you've been living here for several hundred years or several thousand years or ever as long as you can remember, but this is ours now. I don't think I'd respond that well. I just don't. I don't think I would respond well at all. But I cannot imagine. There's all kinds of things that go through my mind.